Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. Here we'll analyze the important articles and the topic that has appeared in the Delhi edition of the Hindi newspaper and analyze them as per the demands of civil services examination. The topics for the discussion are displayed on your screen. All the prelims compass, that is the compass for economy, polity and governance, science and tech, environment and international relations are now available on the PDF channel of the RAU'S IAS. The link for the PDF channel of the RAU'S IAS is in the description section. Moving on to the first article of the day, that article is featured on page 9 of the Hindu under the report of Ground Zero. Now the news article highlights the ongoing strike by the women students of Rukmani Devi College of Fine Arts. Now this college is under the autonomous body of Kalakshetra Foundation. Students are on a protest accusing the 4 staff members, including the assistant professor, of sexual harassment, verbal abuse and also of body shaming. Now, through the help of this article, we'll try to understand what basically the case involves and what are the ethical issues involved in the case. We have seen that the strike is against the sexual harassment, the verbal abuse and the body shaming happening at the hands of authority in the colleges, that is the assistant professor and those including the staff members. We'll try to understand what are the ethical issues involved and the way forward to avoid such problem not only in the college but in general fields of administration also. Now we'll try to understand the ethical issues involved in the case. The first ethical issue that involves in the case is the sexual exploitation of women and women being again objectified as the objects for the sexual pleasure. In this case, more than 250 girls students are now protesting against their sexual harassment by the staff members. This not only highlights the sexual harassment by the staff members, but the mentality that has been prevalent and the fear of no action. Due to the concentration of authority and the hand in gloves with the administration and the other people of the staff, there is a concentration of authority particularly in this place, and where the position of influence by the staff member is being enjoyed against their misconduct, that is the sexual misconduct being conducted by them. So the sexual exploitation of women is the first ethical issue that this case highlights. The second ethical issue that this case highlights is the lack of good governance on the part of college administration. Now the article reflects that many a times before, the internal complaints committee was given the complaints regarding the sexual harassment. But the internal complaints committee have rejected the accusation without even investigating the matter. So this highlights that the internal complaints committee that has been formulated or set up for the same purpose is not doing the job as per the demand. The third case that highlights here is the misuse of authority by the staff members. Now instead of taking action against the accused, the organization here had issued a gag order. The organization has issued a gag order preventing student and staff from discussing any of the events related to the sexual misconduct. The fourth ethical issue involved here is the lack of mutual trust. Now, the article also says that the former director has even accused the current director of having affairs with the student. This highlights that there is a lack of mutual trust within the organization also, and this not only highlights the sexual harassment or the predatory behavior that is happening in the organization, but also jeopardizes the level of skill and education being imparted at the institution. Now the fifth ethical issue involved here is the lack of professionalism. Now in this particular case, the National Commission for Women, that is the statutory organization which is primarily mandated to promote and safeguard the interest of women, has closed the case even without investigation, and this highlights the dereliction of duty of a statutory body which has been incorporated for the very purpose. Next ethical issue involved in this case is the lack of freedom of choice, because not only the sexual harassment but the students of the college also accuses the administration of not allowing them to visit their home even in the case of emergencies, and the college diktat or the rules allowing them to visit or go out only for 3 hours bi-weekly. Further, this particular case also highlights the ethical issue of false recognition or aggrandizement of the person who is responsible for sexual misconduct. The director of the college was honored as a part of Women's Day celebration. Now, this highlights the false recognition on the part of college administration towards the director, it is a step in the dilution of problem, highlighting the better character of the director, and rather reinforces glorification on the director part. The next ethical issue involved in this case is the atmosphere of fear that is prevalent. As the police has informed the media that none of the existing students have came forward to register an official complaint against the management, rather the complaint was filed from a former student. And this highlights the level of fear that the students are living with, because in the insecurity of their future, if they complain against the administration or go against the college administration, and the possible repercussions of such an action on their future. The next ethical issue that this case involves is depriving education to these women. Now in this particular case, many girls have left college, and this is a particular case because they have not completed their degree. Further, what it does is goes against the basic right of education, as women in India or the girls in India already faces the issue of low enrollments, and such incidences, that is the incidences of sexual misconduct in the level at the institutions of college, will further deter the families of girl child to send their girls for formal education. This case also highlights the violation of fundamental rights of girls, because the girls were not allowed to protest against the administration for their genuine demands and interests, thus clearly violating the fundamental rights of these girl students. At the last, the article also highlights the discrimination and favoritism that is prevalent. Now, this is a case of partisanship which is happening, as some students have alleged that they have faced discrimination because of their language and the caste. So not only the sexual misconduct on the part of staff teachers and the staff members, but also discrimination based on the language and caste is also happening in the same college. Now this case study is not only relevant, or the ethical issues is not only relevant to this particular college, but can be replicated in the number of colleges around India. And even in the premier institutes like that of IIT have shown some of the incidences of discrimination based on caste and language. So this brings us to the question that what can be the way forward regarding the same. The first step that can be taken in this particular case is to set up an impartial inquiry mechanism and to take the strict action of those involved in such sexual misconduct, such that a deterrence is created at the earliest. Second step that can be taken in the medium term is that reforming and restructuring the internal complaints committee. The women members or the stakeholders' participation in the internal complaints committee needs to be increased, so they are better represented and can voice their concern against the administration or any issue that they face. And the internal complaints committee, which is established by law, perform its function in letter as well as spirit. The next thing that can be done is to depoliticization of the statutory bodies, that is the National Commission for Women and the State Commission for the Women, so that they can actively take steps for the betterment of women or for whatever purpose they have been stepped forward for, and not as a refuge or political placings. Further, there is also a need for gender sensitization of police officers that are handling such cases. And at the last, fast-track special courts for the similar purpose should be set up as a long-term measure to ensure speedy justice against those who are involved in the crime. So with this, we have seen that what were the ethical issues that are involved in this case particularly, and also can be replicated across the other colleges around the country. And we've also suggested some of the way forward in the immediate, medium and the long-term measure to avoid such problems at the educational institutes. Moving on to the article of the day that has appeared on page 8 of the Hindu, basically talks about the issue of Myanmar. Now the Myanmar Junta, who is notorious for the attacks on civilians, has recently carried out an airstrike on the opposition in the Sangyang region. Now, the article further explains that the National Unity Government, that is the parallel administration formed by the opposition parties, have accused the junta of using fighter jet and combat aircraft for bombing the gathering that was celebrating the opening of administrative office of National Unity Government. The National Unity Government has been declared by the regime, that is the junta, as a terrorist entity. Now, this article is important because Myanmar is a next door neighbor for India. After the coup that happened in 2021, and after which Aung San Suu Kyi party, that is the National League for Democracy, was removed, the country has slipped into a civil war. The civil war is happening between the military regime and the National Unity Government, that is an organization of the opposition group. In the recent times, the National Unity Government, using its armed wing, that is the People Defense Forces, has been able to defeat the military regime at certain places, and the military regime has lost amounts of territories in populated rural as well as the jungle area. And it is this incapability of the regime to recapture these lost land that the regime has now relied on the airstrikes. Now, the article tries to further explain that due to the tacit support that Russia and China has been giving to the military regime and the complete silence from India, the military regime in Myanmar is not facing any regional pressure. The ASEAN countries, which have earlier proposed a 5-point peace plan to end the hostilities, has not been able to successfully carve out any logical solution for the area, as the generals have refused to talk to the opposition and are not ready to share forward with the opposition parties. Now, this topic is particularly important from the General Studies 2 perspective. It talks about the international relation and particularly the bilateral relations of India. The country of Myanmar becomes even more important because it is a neighborhood country. India shares a long land border with Myanmar of 1600 km, and 4 of the Indian northeastern states, that is Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram, shares boundary with Myanmar. Apart from that, India and Myanmar also have a religious and linguistic ties. The Myanmar is also important for India because it is the only ASEAN country that is adjoining India. Therefore, it acts as a gateway for India to the Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a region where India has been seeking from the past a greater integration. And India in the past has launched the Look East, which is now Act East policy for the same. Myanmar is also important for India from the business point of perspective, that is the economic point of perspective, because Myanmar is a surging economy and thus provide new vistas for engagement for the Indian business community. Through this article, we will try to understand what has been the traditional Indian policy towards the Myanmar, what is the importance of Myanmar for India, what has been the implication of coup of Myanmar, what is the implication of coup that happened in 2021 on India, and what has been the Indian response and the way forward in engagement with Myanmar. Now that we know that India shares a long land border with Myanmar and also shares a maritime boundary in the Bay of Bengal, we need to understand what has been the India's policy towards Myanmar. The first thing that guides Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar is the non-interference in the internal politics. Myanmar has been under the military control for the various decades in the past, and during the military control, it was very much closer to China. Since the 1990s, India has always supported democratization of the Myanmar. Further, India after 1990s believes in the policy of engagement rather than criticizing Myanmar. Now, India knows the importance of Myanmar in the geopolitical space and also the strategic location that the Myanmar acquires. And thus, India believes in engagement rather than criticizing the government of Myanmar as a practical approach. So, there is a sense of pragmatism in Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar. Now, one of the main ingredients of India's foreign policy towards Myanmar is balancing the influence of China. Countering the influence of China is an important step in Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar. And in succession to those, India established a liaison office in Myanmar in the newly built capital of Naypyidaw. And before that, it was only China that in 2017 has opened up a liaison office in Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is also important because of the growing closeness between Myanmar and China. And this is important for India because India is next door neighbor of Myanmar, and Myanmar has China have entered into the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which is also termed by scholars as the Belt and Road Initiative of Myanmar. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor is a cause of concern for India as it fulfills the policy of encirclement of India by China, and thus India has been playing a balancing act against China. Apart from these three reasons, India's foreign policy towards Myanmar is the one with the construction of strategic infrastructure development and partnership in Myanmar. India has proposed a petroleum refinery in Myanmar and has promised a $6 billion investment for the same. Further, India has been instrumental in development of the Sittwe port in Myanmar. Apart from the Sittwe port, the two countries, that is India and Myanmar, have been working strong in enhancing their developmental partnership, wherein India has been providing assistance to Myanmar in critical projects like the IMT highway, that is the India, Myanmar and Thailand trilateral highway. And apart from that, India provided key investment in the Kaladan multimodal transit project to Myanmar. Both the countries in the recent times have also enhanced their cooperation in the issue of border management, as both countries believe in the mutual commitment and not to allow the respective territories to be used for activities that are detrimental for the other country. So this has been the Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar, wherein it believes in democratization of Myanmar, believes in engagement rather than criticizing the government of Myanmar, balancing the developmental role by China through its own developmental initiative projects like that in Kaladan multimodal project, the IMT highway, petroleum refinery announcement, and engaging with Myanmar on border management to neutralize any threats that the country may face from non-state actors located in each other's country. Now this brings us to the next part of our discussion, that what has been the implication of Myanmar's military coup on India. In the very beginning, we have discussed that in 2021, the military coup happened in Myanmar. The first major implication of the Myanmar's military coup was on the border security. Now, due to the military coup in Myanmar, refugees fled from the military crackdown and were entering into the Mizoram region of India. And this has caused domestic issue in India, wherein the center and the Mizoram government were at loggerheads for the support of refugees, because the center government has directed for the sealing of the borders, and this has irked the state government, which have ethnic and cultural relationship with the people of Myanmar. So a change in domestic politics of a neighboring country has yet again left an impact on the domestic issues in India, wherein the center and the state government of Mizoram were at loggerheads. The second problem or the implication of Myanmar's military coup is the strategic concern. Because if India provides refuge to the citizens that are fleeing Myanmar, it will upset the Myanmar's junta government, which in the past had not have a very cordial relationship with India and was more tilted towards China. So there is a strategic concern that if India provides refuge to these fleeing citizens of Myanmar, the military junta of Myanmar will further drift away from India and go towards their traditional ally, that is China. And this fear came true as India in the recent times has confronted Myanmar with the intelligence showing that China is providing assistance in building a surveillance post in the Coco Island region of Indian Ocean, which is detrimental to the security and strategic concern of India. The third implication is again related to China, that is containment of China. Though India was partnering with Myanmar on the developmental front, but due to the military coup that has happened in Myanmar, India had to recalibrate its foreign policy vis-a-vis Myanmar so that the relationship between the two countries are not deteriorated further. Another possible implication of Myanmar military coup was the insurgency, as various ethnic armed organizations, as we have seen, were against the military junta rule, and this armed resistance can very well spread to the Indian side. Further, the military coup in Myanmar has dwindled the Indian investment, as the instability in Myanmar due to the ongoing conflict has threatened Indian investment in Myanmar. For example, the Karadan multimodal project or the IMD trilateral highway all be jeopardized due to the instability and constant struggle between the junta and the national unity government of Myanmar. Further, there can be also an opportunity to reduce the influence of China If India is successful in establishing developmental relationship with the junta, with the military junta, because in the last years the democratic government of Myanmar had tilted towards China because of the support given by the Chinese to the Myanmar on Rohingya crisis. So if India is able to successfully build relationship with military junta, it will be beneficial for India to reduce the influence of China. The last implication of the military coup in Myanmar will be that the instability that is created due to the coup can boost drug trafficking. We know that the location of Myanmar is such that it falls in the area of Golden Triangle, and the region is one of the largest producer of heroin. And due to the instability that is created and with the return of junta military rule, most of the people that are involved in the drug trade are pro junta, and thus this can increase the drug trafficking to the Indian side, as the drug trade businessmen having their allegiance towards the junta government can have support from the junta regime. So this brings us to the question that what has been the India's approach towards the military coup. Now India has followed a calibrated approach towards Myanmar. Initially India followed a wait and watch approach, but has now later called for the return of democracy, but has stayed away from the approach of condemnation, threats and sanction on the junta government, realizing the regional realities and the geopolitical importance of Myanmar. India has carefully stayed away and has followed the policy of non-interference by not offering any kind of mediation support between the military or the national unity government. In a response to the Indian foreign policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of Myanmar, the junta regime has also pledged that the Myanmar's territory would not be allowed for any activities that is detrimental to the interest of India. Now that we have seen the Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar, we need to analyze what is the importance of Myanmar for India. We know that India and Myanmar shares a long and porous border of 1600 kilometers. Myanmar is a key link between South Asia to the Southeast Asia and is the only neighboring country of India which is a member of the ASEAN. Thus, Myanmar stands at the confluence of India's neighborhood first and the Act East policy. Further, Myanmar is also important for India for the development of the northeastern states or the northeastern region of India and to overcome the chicken neck dilemma or the Siliguri corridor dilemma that India faces. Further, it is also important for not only the development of the northeastern states but to keep them peaceful by avoiding any kind of insurgency and the support to the non-state actors through the territories of Myanmar. And at the last, Myanmar is also important for India because of its location within the Golden Triangle and to avoid any kind of narco-terrorism and the social and the legal problems that arises due to the drug trade to be avoided. And this brings us to the last part of our discussion, that what is then the way forward with the current ongoing regime of military junta in Myanmar. It is important that a peaceful resolution is met in Myanmar, and this is particularly important for the stability of the Southeast Asia. Hence, India, along with other powers such as Russia and China, with the member countries of ASEAN, should work in the direction to come out with a peaceful resolution. There is a need to ensure a political pressure of some kind on the military regime such that restoration of the democracy under a constitutional setup is reached with gradual transition. As a stable Myanmar is in the interest of India and also for the Southeast Asian country. So with this we have seen what the article talks about, what has been the Indian foreign policy towards Myanmar, what is the importance of Myanmar for India, what implication did the coup in Myanmar played on India, and what has been the Indian response to the same. And at the last we have also discussed the way forward for the same. Moving on to the next article of the day, the article has featured on page 14 of the Hindu and basically talks about the exports in the textile and the apparel sector. Now the article mentions that the textile and the apparel exports have contracted by the 14% in 2022-23 when compared with the previous year data. In 2021-2022, $41 billion of exports were conducted and the textile sector and apparel sector contributed towards 9.79% towards total export. However, in 2022-23, the contribution from the textile and the apparel sector has come down and it is now reduced to 7.95% only, with sector contributing around $35 billion, which was close to $41 billion a year before. Through this article, we'll try to understand what are the problems of Indian exports or why India is underperforming in the field of exports. Secondly, we'll also discuss why India needs export-led growth, as it was also recommended by the economic survey. What government steps have been taken in this regard to promote exports in India, and fourthly, what are the major recommendations regarding the same. Now, this topic is particularly important from the GS3 section of our Indian economy and can be asked in the mains examination regarding what can be the possible steps that can be suggested to improve India in field of exports and emerge as a net exporter economy. Now, first we'll try to understand the reason for India's underperformance in exports. The first basic reason behind India's underperformance in the exports is the low level of participation in the global value chain. Now, for any country to emerge as a top export destination, it has to be a part of global value chain. But the global value linkage of India when compared to its neighbor countries like that of China is particularly low. Also, India is not a member of various regional groupings like that of RCEP, etc., which places it at a disadvantage and thus is not able to align with the global value chains. The second important cause of underperformance of Indian exports is the limited diversification of India's export basket. Now, if we analyze the Indian exports, under the Indian export basket, the 10 principal items under the commodity group occupy 78% of the total merchandise export, meaning thereby only 10 commodity items occupy 78% of the total merchandise export and thus highlights limited diversification in the Indian export basket. Now, the third reason for India's underperformance in exports is the low competitiveness of Indian products. Now, Indian products lack competitiveness when compared to the products from the other countries. And this is primarily because of the complex laws, that is, the complex land and labor laws that are present in India. Also, due to the inadequate infrastructure and the fragmented nature of Indian logistics sector. So these are the reasons behind the main problem. Another problem for India's underperformance in the exports is its inability to exploit the comparative advantage in the low skilled and the labor intensive sectors. Particularly if we take the examples of textile and the apparel sector, which has been also reflected in the article, has contracted in the recent year. India has not been able to take the advantage in this low skilled sector and which is also labor intensive and crucial for the supporting the growing population, but India has not been able to take the advantage and the share in the world exports of textile, garment, footwear has been on a decline, which is also represented with the facts and figure as we have discussed in the beginning. And in recent year, countries like Bangladesh have caught up with the Indian share of the textile exports, and another country like Vietnam has already overtaken India in the field of textile. And this is primarily because of the economies of scale, as the size of manufacturing units in these countries are large when compared to that of India, and through the economies of scale, by more quantitative production, they bring down the cost and defeat India in taking the comparative advantage of their low skilled and labor intensive export areas. Further, another reason that has been identified for the India's underperformance in the field of exports is the regional disparities. Regional disparities is shown by the figure that 70% of Indian exports has been dominated by the 5 states. And under this, there is also presence of inter-regional and intra-regional disparities, wherein the coastal states have outperformed any of the landlocked state in field of exports. Further, it has also been seen that in the landlocked states, the policy promotion and the government policy for export promotion is missing. And at the national level, Poor research and development infrastructure to promote complex and unique exports is missing, which is thus curbing the ability of India to export in large quantity. So that now we have discussed the reasons for India's underperformance in exports. This brings to us a logical question that why does India need a export-led growth, or why India needs to boost its export? The first reason that India needs to boost its export is that export can help India to achieve the target of making India as a developed economy by focusing on the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Secondly, Economic Survey has also advocated for the export-led growth. And the basic reason for export-led growth as advocated under the Economic Survey also is the economic growth. As higher number of exports will draw in more foreign exchange, and this will promote job creation, which will further create demand and the infrastructure that is needed to support the export sector, and will ultimately bring down the current account deficit of the government. Thus, it will have a spiral effect wherein the exports will attract better forex reserves, will give a boost to demand, the infrastructure will be strengthened, the job creation will happen to cater to the increased demand, and through this, the current account deficit of India will come down. The third reason or the idea behind to boost export is that major economies around the world today are also major exporters. No major economy of the world today is not a major exporter, whether they export knowledge or technology or be it the merchandise trade. No economy in this world, in the global order today, has emerged as a strong economic power without strong exports, and this can be collaborated by the fact by taking the example of China, which is the world's leading exporter of goods. Further, the need for the export-led growth is that India will have to become a member of global value chain, as exports will give domestic seller increased access to the market that helps to achieve or capture a chunk of global market share. Further, apart from the economic growth and the contribution in job creation, as well as in reducing the current account deficit, exports will be very beneficial to mitigate the regional disparities in India and remove the concepts like that of pockets of development and promote the concept of inclusive growth, that is, the growth for all. As it was also highlighted by the Economic Survey report that by improving the export competitiveness, the regional disparities will be reduced. And the Economic Survey has also highlighted that the states which have engaged with the world market, or the coastal states that are leaders in export from India, are richer when compared to the states that are not involved in the exports market. So that now we have discussed why India needs an export-led growth. This brings us to the next logical question, that what the Indian government so far has done in this regard, that is to promote export in India. The first step taken by the government is the focus on agricultural products. Now the proactive support for export promotion agencies has been done by establishing of various plantation boards and also the organization of APIDA, that is the Agriculture and Processed Food Products Export Development Authority, and this has been primarily done to improve the agriculture exports in India. Secondly, what the Indian government has done is to introduce the interest equalization scheme. Now this scheme was carefully drafted by the Indian government and was formulated to give benefit in the interest rate. The interest rate which is being charged by the banks on pre and post shipment export credits. The third step taken by the Indian government has been the remission of duties and taxes on the exported products, or the RAU'S scheme. And the basic idea behind the RAU'S scheme was to seek remission of any kind of central, state and the local duties or the taxes that are levied at different stages. Further, the government has also launched the Export Credit Guarantee Scheme. The Export Credit Guarantee Corporation support Indian exporters and the banks by providing insurance facilities and insurance covers on the export consignment to protect the exporters from the consequences of payment risk. Government has also launched Krishi Udan scheme, and this has been launched to assist farmers in transporting agricultural products so that it can help in value realization in the real time. Further, the government has also launched the Trade Infrastructure for Export scheme. And the basic idea behind Trade Infrastructure for Export scheme is to provide financial assistance. Now, this financial assistance is provided in the form of grant in aid to the center or the state government, to the center and the state government owned agency for setting up upgradation of export infrastructure. At the last, government has also launched district as export hub or the one district one product initiative, and which is primarily aimed at targeting export promotion, employment generation at the grassroots level. This will not only boost export or generate employment, but will address the need of inclusive growth at the same time also. So that now we have discussed the need for export-led growth and the steps taken by the government in this regard. We'll come to the last part of our discussion, that what further can be done to boost export in India. And for this, the recommendation of high-level advisory group, which was set up by the Ministry of Commerce, can be taken into account and can be used to answer any question on this. The first recommendation was given for the technology, wherein the high-level group has advocated the use of big data and concepts of Industry 4.0 with profound influence on manufacturing. Further, the second step recommended by the high-level advisory group is the financial support to the industry, that is the export industry, by bringing down the effective corporate tax rate to 18% and also to bring down cost of capital for those seeking credit from the banks to promote export. And also at the same time, it has recommended to increase the capital base of India's Exim Bank. The next step recommended by the group is in the field of good governance, wherein it has suggested evidence-based policy making, strengthen the investment promotion agency, and build overall trade promotion organization for the same purpose. The advisory group has also suggested identification of champion sectors, and 12 champion services at present for the same purpose were also selected, and it was recommended to come out of all infrastructural deficiencies that these identified sector at currently faces. Further, the next step recommended by the high-level advisory group is to link global and regional value chains, wherein it has recommended to lower and simplify the tariffs and identify products and segments where Indian firms can integrate with the global value chains. The advisory group has also recommended setting up of inter-ministerial group to evolve a national level thinking for WTO related issues to further the Indian interest at the level of WTO basically. And at the last, the high level advisory group has also recommended the role for the regional trade agreements, wherein it has recommended a 5-year timeline for negotiation of free trade agreements. Thus, these are the set of measures that have been recommended by the high level advisory group, which was set up by Ministry of Commerce. In this article, we have also seen why India needs export-led growth and the steps already taken by the government to promote exports in India. And the part of our discussion in the very beginning involved the reasons for India's underperformance in the field of exports.